Hello, everybody, and welcome back to From the Ground Up, Western Cover Crop Pacific Northwest Sub-Regional Conference Series number 3. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Steve Hines. I'm with the University of Idaho Extension. Today's topics are going to focus on dryland and irrigated systems of the inland Pacific Northwest. I would like to mention that this conference is being sponsored by a grant from the Western SARE, and we really appreciate their support of our program. Our next speaker this afternoon is Doug Collins. Doug is with Washington State University Extension, and he'll be visiting with you about regenerative agriculture practices in irrigated vegetable systems in Central Washington. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about regenerative agriculture practices in the irrigated vegetables in Central Washington. I want to recognize Nathan Stacy. He works with me. He's a postdoctoral researcher, and he did a lot of this work. And then we have 3 farm collaborators that allowed us to do this research on their land and helped basically, think of the ideas and collaborate in many different ways. Jim Baird with Cloudview Farm, Brad Bailey, Linwood Farms, and Rachel Hills and Brian Anderson with Anderson Organics. So this is from the Rodale Institute, their sort of definition of regenerative agriculture, a focus on soil health, animal welfare, social fairness. Soil health is really a key part of regenerative agriculture. And some of the tenets of it are crop rotation, cover crops, and reducing tillage. The background for this project started with some what we call farm walks. These are farmer-led events where farmer education is the key role, and we had farm walks at Linwood Farms and Cloudview. Linwood uses a lot of cover crops in their they're about a 650-acre organic vegetable farm in the Columbia Basin, and they use cover crops intensely, and so we had a great event there. And then at Cloudview Organic Farm as well. And then we had a research planning meeting in Ephrata, Washington in May of 2018, where we invited organic producers and those that use cover crops to help us identify priorities for research. And cover crop management, weed management and biology, crop rotation, in-season weed management, soil quality, and animal integration were all ideas that came to the forefront. So in terms of animal integration, that's something that Jim Baird is very interested in. And at a farm walk in 2018, he did a demonstration with goats grazing on Sudan grass, and it worked really well. And so we integrated that into our project. Unfortunately, when we were going to graze goats so we were doing sort of a grazed and ungrazed, we had, I think we mowed a bit late and we were waiting to get more biomass. So we ended up planning the grazing around October 10th on Sudan grass. So the picture you're looking at is from a previous event where things worked really well. So we had a hard freeze, I think, on October 3rd, 2019, and sent these goats out there anyway, but they would not have it. They wouldn't touch the Sudan grass. So that project kind of ended with that, or took a turn, I guess. So to recover things, we planted a cover crop of triticale and Austrian winter peas, and this was going to be grazed in the spring of the next year. And so that was successful. It was mowed. So we did a mowing and a grazing comparison. We only had 2 replications, but so it's more of a demonstration than kind of research. But we mowed May 15th and then grazed on May 16th, and then planted another crop to evaluate the effect on the following crop of oats and peas on May 21st. And you can see these were the total biomass of the cover crop here. And then the graph is showing the total biomass of the following cash crop in the grazed versus mowed. So we saw a little bit of a bump with the grazing versus the mowing, but again, not statistically significant, and a little bit more increased nitrogen. But Jim was highly impressed with it. He from just kind of looking out the window, he said, you could really see the increase in regrowth following the grazing. And so he's pretty pleased. So this is something that will likely continue. there was a couple of lessons learned. So one of the problems that we discovered this second time around was we let it grow to about 3 to 4 feet before grazing. And there was kind of a strong trampling effect from the goats. So they weren't necessarily able to eat it as much as they were just kind of trampling it along. And then another lesson learned from this research is we were trying to get replications in there. So we had very narrow corridors, and that didn't work as well. The goats were kind of forced to, walk all over it a little bit more than they were grazing on it. So this was just kind of a demonstration, trying to learn a little bit about animal integration into these systems. The other project that we did was in organic onion production. And this just kind of shows a typical, so this was done on Linwood Farms and Anderson Organic, and this shows the typical system that is used, at least at Linwood. So they would typically plant, almost 2 years before onions are going to go in. There would be a fall planting of triticale vetch. And then that's it's going to do a lot of growing in the following spring. It's going to be irrigated, and then it's going to be incorporated. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then following that, there would be another cover crop planted of usually mustard. And then that's incorporated in around November. And then the next spring, onions are planted. So in these organic systems, a lot of cover cropping done previous to the onion planting. So in terms of looking at improving this system, one thing that Brad has been looking at or questioning is the ability to integrate animals at this step. We didn't research this, but I just want to give a sense of kind of what he's doing now and where animals might come in. So this is that triticale vetch, which can be as tall as 6 feet or more. And then Brad's incorporating that here with a spader. And let me see if this works. So he has a front mounted mower and then a spader. So in one pass, incorporating that triticale vetch. So again, the idea, or one question, and we haven't researched this thus far, but he's played around a little bit with integrating animals into this step. So basically eliminating or changing how that cover crop is dealt with at that spring growth incorporation. Okay, so the other area where there was research is this looking at this mustard previous to the onion. So some specific questions that growers have are other cover crops should be considered there, and then planting date. So we did a study at 2 farms. These are much bigger plots. So I'm on the west side of Washington, but I work a lot with organic growers. So it's great to get into the basin to do some of this work where most of the organic vegetables are grown, but plots much bigger than I'm used to. So this is a quarter of a circle here. And we looked at a mix of sorghum Sudan grass and mustard. So we had 100% sorghum Sudan grass, and then 66% and 33%. And then the same with mustard at 100, 66, and 30, mixing with sorghum Sudan grass. And then we had an early planting date and a late planting date. And this is critical because, for example, at Brad's place, water is not always available. So when you want it, so the early planting date may work for some folks, but the late planting date is often where others are forced to if there's not enough water to put on the cover crop. And so you can see here there was a pretty strong effect with the early and the late with both crops. So here's 100% mustard on the left with the early, and then a late right next to each other, and then 100% sorghum Sudan grass with early and late. And I'll have some data to show what that looked like exactly. And then this is just kind of we didn't have a drone picture, so this is standing on top of the pickup trying to get a sense of those plots, so really large plots. And then looking straight down, you can see the mixed sorghum Sudan grass, 100%, the mixed sorghum Sudan grass plus mustard. And then here, the 100% sorghum Sudan, and then here is the 100% mustard. So one thing to note here when you're looking straight down is that weed understory in the sorghum Sudan grass versus looking through the mustard, where very few weeds, if any, are growing below that salad there. And so these data show the early, the late, the portion of sorghum Sudan grass, which is in the yellow, and then the mustard in the green. And so, for example, here's 100% sorghum Sudan grass planted, 100% mustard. So you can see the, and then at the very top there, we have the weed biomass. So the vast majority of the biomass out there is dominated by these cover crops. And you can see the strong effect with the planting date. And then so this is just without the weeds, just looking at the cover crops by themselves with some statistical error bars here. And there was a site effect, but no treatment effect. And then there's also a time by treatment effect. So in the later planting date, we do see more of an effect with the treatment. So in general, there's no treatment effect, but when you look just at the late, you can see that Sudan grass really suffers the most from that later planting. And, that's because it is very, it's a more warm season. So as it starts to get colder, it doesn't put on as much biomass. And then here we're looking at just the weeds. And this is including a no cover crop control. I didn't go into detail on what we did with the no cover crop control, but cover crops are so important in these systems, it would not be tenable for the farmers to allow us to have a big swath of no cover crops. So what we did is we planted Sudan grass in the no cover crop control, and then went out into a plot area, a smaller plot area, and scrubbed out the cover crop. So we would have a little area that had no cover crop. And you can see the weeds that dominate when we don't have a cover crop at all. And so here we're looking at, got rid of the no cover crop so we can see a little more detail of between the cover crops themselves. So there was a site effect. There was more weed pressure at the Anderson farm. You can see that especially here. And then at both farms, you can see the weed biomass coming up in that sorghum Sudan grass plot. We got onion harvest only at Linwood Farms, not at Anderson, and that really, the blame for that lies with COVID. It caused a lot of plans to be changed on the fly, and so we did not get an onion harvest there. But what we found then with the onion harvest is that the one that really sort of did stick out was the Sudan grass that had the highest yield. And, that was interesting. Brad definitely found this interesting, but he also commented that the larger weed population is alarming. And, it's not something to be able to let, even though the weed biomass is not very large, having any kind of weeds out there or more weeds would certainly be an issue because they can go to seed and cause problems. And I'd say also another comment here with there's a relatively high yield in the no cover crop control. And I think that's a testament to sort of the years of good practice. So even though we had no cover crop in one season, it takes years to sort of reduce weed pressure in these systems. So 1 year without cover crops didn't show a huge decrease in yield. And this project was funded by Washington State University BioAg program. And I want to thank the research collaborators, Ian Burke, Tim Waters, and Chris Benedict, the goat herder extraordinaire, Billy Porter, who works with Jim. And then if you are interested in cover crops in the Columbia Basin, we want to hear from you. So please get in touch.
Thank you, Doug. Very interesting.